Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, you can go ahead and check out the Poketown store. You can even get an extra 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we are going to be looking at the Knoxville Regional Championship results. It happened just this past weekend, and it is still in our Ultra Prism to Unified Minds format. It was a big old regional, 778 Masters, and it was taken down once again by Mewtwo. Mewtwo really is carving its name out as possibly the best archetype in the format. We do also see a lot of success with Pikarom in this event. We're going to be doing a quick breakdown of the top 8 deck lists, talking about them, and then we'll look at the overall day 2 as well. So let's start off with Daniel Tavia. Very star-studded player, one of the strongest players in the game over the last like 3 or 4 years, I would say easily. And he was able to pilot Mewtwo to the win. You can also see that Azul, once again, after winning his last regional, he also placed top 4 with the exact same 60. And Caleb also got himself a nice top 32 finish with the build. So looks like the DDG guys all played basically the same archetype, more or less. And yeah, this is their ironed out 60. It is different from Azul's list the previous week. He added in the resetting hole Marshadow. And Danny, in his own little post, he says that he basically was like, he liked Azul's list and he just went with that, basically. So it's playing the 4 Mewtwo, 4 Dedenne, Solgaleo, Charizard, Magcargo, SVDO, Latios, Naganadel, sticking with the Jirachi GX as your defense for sort of sorting out weakness. Still has the Mind Report Mewtwo, but definitely did make that space for Marshadow. And I definitely think that's reasonable, especially because Mewtwo just won. An instant reaction is going to be, we need to have more power plants in deck list and stuff like that. So very obvious include. I do feel like it was lacking in the previous list, so I think this is just a nice safe card to add into the build. I don't really know what was cut from his list. It might have just been one Pokegear that was cut for the Marshadow, but essentially it's just the very vanilla baseline shell, like the most consistent Mewtwo you'll see, basically, because it's playing the 4 Acrobikes, playing 3 Gear, 4 Treasure, 4 Cherish, 4 Welder, like all 4 ofs basically, and it's really like low on the tech attacking Pokemon. We saw Tord with his list that won over in Europe, and it was teched out basically with all the attackers to deal with all sorts of situations. Whereas the American list that's done well last week and this week just say, oh, if I run into bad matchups, I take the loss, I guess. But they're hoping that they don't run into enough Guardian or enough Quagnag or enough like random wall Keldeo decks that it's a problem, right? So they're just saying that we'll beat the mainstream matchups easily, and if we hit those bad ones, that's hard luck, but in every other matchup we want to draw good. So you can see that's the sort of stand they've taken here. They've got the usual counts of everything, basically. This is just like a very standard Mewtwo at this point. Still very similar to good old Perfection that we saw at Worlds, but with those regular Pokemon tweaks. So yeah, you can tech this list out more if you want to, by going down different routes of having things like the Reshizard in the list, to have Double Blaze. If you want to play the Greninja and extra energies, you can to have more defense against that sort of stuff. I think with 2 regional wins, like I feel it was risky enough with 1 regional win, well 2 in the same weekend, to not play answers to like the Mewtwo answers. But they've done it again and got away with it, which is pretty insane, to be honest. I'm pretty surprised that there's still not enough like respecters of Mewtwo out there to play like counter decks, I guess. Maybe people are assuming that the counter decks aren't good enough in the field in general. But from like the outside looking in, it seemed like Guardian was like a very strong play for the tournament. Possibly only because Tord's list came out that was kind of saving people, right? Because Tord's Mewtwo list had a super favorable Guardian because it played Double Blaze and it played 2 copies of Labs. So maybe that was putting people off Guardian. But if people were still going to bring this kind of build of Mewtwo, like Guardian would definitely wipe the floor with this. Because they have no answer to Fairy Charm at all. So, yeah, I'm surprised, and I pretty much should assume that Guardian will be on the rise, because not only did Mewtwo do very well, but Pikarom also did very well. So, either Mewtwo has to start playing more Guardian answers, or Pikaroms can go up to like 3 labs, or there are some other things we've seen. The Pikarom players have been respecting Guardian for sure from the top 8, but the Mewtwo lists dodge and weaved and did so very effectively and got a win and a top 4. So we won't look at like Azul's list because it's the same 60, but just know that this 60 did really, really well for DDG, and they really got away with one, I would say, by running the roulette, and enough of them dodged the matchups enough and sort of had a correct metagame call. But yeah, I think it gets riskier the more Mewtwo achieves, basically. We saw Danny be able to take the win against John Eng in the finals with his Pikarom build. The only real interesting notes are that he plays a copy of the Team Up Farfetch'd. Many people discuss the Pachirisu, right, as the tool buster type card, but Farfetch'd can actually draw you 2 cards, so I don't know if this is John trying to min-max and have, like, at the very least a consistency Pokemon in that slot, you know, just like if you happen to start a Pachirisu versus happening to start a Farfetch'd in matchups where he's not good, Farfetch'd can still draw you cards in a pinch, I guess, or if he just couldn't find a Pachirisu. I'm not certain about this, but the Pachirisu has like upside in terms of Electro Power, can boost its damage, whereas Toolbuster is just 90 and discard a tool. But 90 and discard a tool for 1 attachment isn't bad anyways, so that's pretty cool. So this helps you get around spell tags. Obviously, if a Giratina hits himself, the 90 is a perfect number, and also you can do 90 to like a Guardian and remove a tool as well. So maybe this is just like the better answer to Pachirisu. I'm really not sure if it's just one way or the other, like cut and dry, because Paralysis is kind of strong, especially now that Guardian dropped mixed herbs. But the Farfetch is definitely like another answer to tools, and he's already playing 2 labs as well in addition to the Farfetch'd, so really is respecting like spell tags and really is respecting Guardian as well with that tech include. Also playing Mew, so also respecting like Mirror, also really good against Mewtwo. Again, talking about towards 60, where it didn't play custom, it oftentimes relied on trying to knock out things like Dedenne to close games, so that Mew is pretty nice for that reason. It's playing the 4 Volkner 3 Cynthia list. I think the Cynthia list was the big winner over the weekend. I think all 3 of the list played at least some copies of Cynthia from the top 8. So Volkner Cynthia seems to be the split that seems to be the most strong going forward, with the heavy stamp as the best option. One thing I was really happy to see, I guess, is 3 Electro Power, because this is something I've been sort of tinkering with myself a bunch, and I didn't know if I was crazy or not. And I remember I've done some top tier tweaks that have only played 3 Electro Powers as like my greed cut, and I'm really happy to see John get a 2nd place making the same cut as me. So I think it's something that's worth considering for sure. There are matchups where it can be punishing, but I think overall it's a reasonable count to just play 3 copies, and it makes him have room for some other stuff like the power plant and stuff, which is valuable in all sorts of different situations. So yeah. Other than that, all these counts are normal. It's just the stadium count that's kind of I think it's pretty standard overall, but not many people commit the spaces to the full 4 stadiums and a Farfetch'd, you know. So the one-off power plant obviously helps out with like stamping a Mewtwo and stuff like that. Especially if people see labs, they don't oftentimes like expect a power plant to come down later anyways. So they don't often like set up that Marshadow or whatever. And just in general, just makes your stamps more effective against the fire decks and even against Mirror and stuff like that. So Power Plant, a reasonable one-off for sure, giving yourself a lot more sort of control over what your opponent can do on those final turns. And then just the 11 Lightning that we know is like the standard count these days. Bakari in at top 4 with a similar 60. He's playing 2 Cynthia, 1 Bill's Analysis. This is the card we saw Pedro do pretty well with over in Europe. And it's definitely a stronger card in the late game, so I don't mind the sort of min-maxing approach of having 2 Cynthia as like better early game cards and then having the 1 Bills, whereas like if you just Stellar Wish into this card late, it gets you double custom for game sometimes. So like I don't mind adding in 1 Bills to the list at all. From there, nothing too exciting. It's playing the heavy labs approach, so if you're not playing the Pachirisu or the Farfetch'd, I feel like 3 labs is probably correct. Obviously they're expecting some Guardian, obviously it's good against Malamar as well. So 3 labs is definitely what I've been tinkering around with recently, and I think it's very strong, to be honest. The one sort of awkward thing about his 60, I think, is just 2 Jirachis. It does scare me, but if Pika-ROMs are going away from the Judge build, you can kind of get away with this, you know. You probably only like drop this down at some point in the game just so you can like lightning right into it, or like because you can just find zero aura turn 1, you can just attach to anything and retreat when you find a Jirachi. So I don't like hate the 2-of. You can get away with it sometimes, especially if there's less Judge builds running around, more people going towards Cynthia and Bill, which did better like the previous week as well. So yeah, I think I'm not like against 2 Jirachi, but it is a little bit cheeky. So we've already seen Azul's list. That also made top 4, which is really strong. Mahone bringing a different 60 again. This time it is playing the Pachirisu. So the Pachirisu can do 60 and Paralyze for 1 lightning. You can do that 90 with the help on Electro Power against Malamar, so it can still do the Giratina thing. But the extra Paralysis, I guess, is stronger against Guardian. I think it's stronger against Guardian, but it doesn't have that luxury of like drawing you 2 cards in a pinch either. So choose which one you prefer. The Paralysis is awkward for Guardian. They're basically the same card against Malamar. The Pachirisu requiring 1 extra E-power, but that's really about it. So yeah, I think the card's definitely reasonable, and again, it's like respecting those sorts of archetypes basically. Also playing the Zapdos and the Hooper, playing the 3 copies of Jirachi, the 3 Cynthia, so feels like Cynthia's like the big winner and is sort of carving a name for herself as the strongest supporter in Pika-ROM, alongside Voltner, like the strongest secondary supporter, I guess. And everything else is pretty straightforward, just playing the 2 copies of Stamp, and yeah, everything else is pretty normal. So I also really rate Mahone's list. I think this is my favorite of the 3, just because I like having Zapdos and Hooper, and I'm kind of between the 3rd Labs and the Pachirisu. Having an extra non-GX attacker against Mali is pretty good, and it kind of does serve that role as the 3rd Stadium against Guardian. So yeah, I kind of rate this list, I think, the best out of the 3, just personal preference, so it's up to you which one you want to test or whatever, but they're all pretty close, I would say. We see Hunter's 60 is a very interesting Blounds list. Blounds back in the top 8 again, and it plays 3 Naga GX. I remember the DDG guys really early on, like pre-Worlds, were testing like the 4 Naga GX build to draw a bunch of cards, and it kind of like sort of went down in everyone's estimation after we saw the Shintaro's 60 from Worlds, and then we never really like revisited it. But Hunter has, and he's gone very low on the actual physical support account, which makes me a little bit nervous. Sometimes Blounds has played things like Hapu in low counts, Lily in low counts, but he's just saying 4 Welder, 4 Cynthia is good enough for me. I'll try and use the Naga GXs to draw me more cards. So he's playing the Poipoles, he's playing no Heatran whatsoever. He's playing Lysander Labs though, which I think is really cool in Blounds. The 2 Labs means you can get around Guardian in your own way, and you have a much better Malamar matchup. So I do really like the Stadium split. I think that's the strongest thing, like the strongest takeaway from his 60. I'm still not sold on the 3 Naganadel GX, personally. It's more that I dislike only playing 1 Dedenne, and I don't really like the low support account, so I'd probably still make a move back towards like a more regular Naga count, but the thing I really love is playing 2 Labs. That seems really strong for the matchups that you're expecting right now. So yeah, I think that's the only real, like, I guess in air quotes, greed that he has. No Dedenne, well, sorry, 1 Dedenne is a little bit greedy for me, especially with a lower support count. Like, the 2 going together at once makes me very nervous, but it's done very well for him, so definitely interesting for sure. We then see the PGO to control players. 2 made top 8. Grant once again. So both Azul and Grant made it once again, playing the same lists and, well, the same archetypes. Not the same exact 60s, but very close. I think they both made like 1 card different, I think, something like that. And they actually played each other in top 8. So Azul once again besting Grant. Oops, I've clicked on the Recycle Energy that he plays. But yeah, Grant's still playing that Jirachi build of Pidgeot to control. He's playing the one Absol now. I think he actually still played Absol before. But yeah, he has the Absol. It's not the exact same 60 that he played last week. But I think it's still basically the same. There's not too much different. I don't know if he played a 2-2 energy split last week, or if he played the 3-1, I'm not super sure. But playing the third water just opens up Articuno to attack a little bit more, but it's really up to you. What sort of split you want to go for, but everything else I kind of like here. I'm personally a bigger fan of Hapu than the one of Cynthia. But that's basically like the only card that I guess I like disagree with. Everything else looks really cool. He may have gone down to 1 power pad. I'm pretty sure he played 2 last week. So yeah, he's made a space somewhere. It may have been for the Absol, I'm not sure. But yeah, Pidgeotto control, still doing really strong. Still having awkward times against Mewtwo, I guess. I don't think it's like your worst matchup by any means. I think it's winnable, but it's also losable. Just because they can pop off with Welders and ruin your setup in some situations, then you just can't win. So yeah. The other 60 that made it into top 8 was playing the no Jirachi build. Playing no Jirachi does open the door for a few extra things, which I do like. You get to play a Giraffe, or you have more space for Giraffe. It's not only like more physical 60 card space, you have physical bench space to play things like Giraffe down on your board. Also means you have the space for Faber, which I think is a really decent card in the deck as well. You obviously sub out the escape board for a U-turn board, which is a bit more flexible. And the coolest addition from Isaiah's list is Champions Festival. Now, this can really help you defend against things like Mew. And that's a really cool addition. I think it might be a bit more like proactive than Sky Pillar against things like Malamar. So that could be pretty decent. Because Mallies should be trying to set up maths rather than like killing a bird at a time with their Mews. They should be trying to sprinkle like all over the place and then take prizes simultaneously with SBDO. So if you can try and like lock them down in Champions Festival, you can defend against that pretty nicely. So yeah, I think the Champs Festival, definitely a reasonable include into the list. 4 stadiums is a very high count, but I guess it is trying to fight that war as quickly as possible so that you can eventually win that with that power plant. I guess that's the main mentality. And this is playing the 2-2 energy split. Like I said, it's a preference thing. I don't think one's strictly better than the other. There's like the question mark about prizing on both ends of the spectrum, right? You don't want to prize your Recycle. You don't want to prize like one of your Waters if it's a matchup where you have to attack with Articuno. So it's one of those things. Like pick which one you like. Pick your poison, basically. From there, we have Mewtwo and a few other decks. Like the Pidgeotos did pretty well. Like a lot of them made top 16 as well. I think as much as there is a story to be said about Mewtwo doing very well once again and Pikarom being like the outlying second place deck right now, is that there's 2 very cool decks that made top 16. The first is John Mostowoy with his Lucario Melmetal Welder deck. And yeah, so Lucario Melmetal is weak to fire, and that used to be a problem. But now that Ability Zard's kind of gone down in play and seems a lot weaker in the meta, just because of the prevalence of heavy stamp Pikarom builds and stamp in basically every deck now, and the more power plant being played, that kind of has shut Ability Zard out a little bit, push it down maybe to tier 2, and that's kind of opened the doors for this wacky deck to do well. Combining Welder with this card makes it pretty powerful. You can Steel Fist pretty early, do some 50 damage pokes, set things up, get heavy impacting pretty quickly. You're always threatening Full Metal Wall as well. You can like Welder, and then you know, straight away you're doing the full effective Full Metal Wall to reduce that damage. And this plays a bunch of healing. This is playing the Frying Pans in the 3 count to reduce your damage even further. After you've GX'd, you're minusing 60. And then you're playing 4 Mixed Herb, 4 Great Potion. That's a lot of health that you're making people get through. This is a very awkward card, let me tell you, for a lot of decks to get through. This is not easy. You even have Psychic Resistance, so you can be minusing 80 coming into you from a Mewtwo, which is pretty nuts. Especially when the DDG guys, they weren't playing Reshizard. So yeah, that's pretty scary, right? Pretty intense, really. Very cool greens build. I think this is really cool to see. It's playing heavy power plant, and it's playing 2 reset stamps. So, you know, you've got some pretty cool options going on here. I really want to test this out at some point this week because it's completely out of the blue, and it's really a cool metagame call. It's taking advantage of the dip in Ability Zard, and it's come out with a really awesome greens build. I'm pretty sure this would wipe the floor with Guardian, and I'm pretty sure that amount of reduction that you have is probably really good against a lot of different things, to be honest. Pretty good against Pikarom, I would imagine. So yeah, I feel like this archetype is worth exploring for sure. Very cool to see that do well. Equally interesting is Jeffrey's Blacephalon Pidgeotto deck. So we've seen the Baby Blounds list be successful mainly with a greens engine. But now we see a very cool Elm build trying to get Pidgeotto online, finally working for the side of good, and finally trying to take prizes. You're using Airmail to help you get into things like Fiery Flints and Fire Crystals to just do big blown damage, basically. So a lot of draw power in this list, having the Pidgeys, the Jirachis. So you're just trying to be an uptrade deck, basically. Nice, honest uptrading. Just doing the job, really, which is really cool. It's also got a Heatran GX in here as well. It can sweep up some energies off a Blown if you've got like backup welders and stuff, which is pretty cool. If people are trying to pick off the Pidgeottos and leave your Blowns around, that can be pretty nice for you. So yeah, I think this is also one that I need to explore this week. So although I am going to be doing a lot of like new deck lists and stuff, new format videos, I'm going to be weaving in some current format stuff as well, because there's just so much interesting stuff from this weekend. So yeah, really cool list to see this as well, I think, for sure. Very cool way of digging towards your outs throughout the entire game with that list, because there's obviously like the huge question marks about the greens list, like surviving Stamp and stuff, and now you just don't have that. You have the peace of mind of always being able to Stellar Wish towards game and use Pidgeotto towards game. I remember when Blowns first came out, I definitely played it alongside Jirachi and preferred that build way more to just a green build because it felt way too all-in. So from personal preference, I definitely want to try out the Pidgeotto list. From there, we don't see many high-placing Malamars, not quite as high as the previous weeks. None made top 8 this time. I think none made top 16 here. Nor did Guardian. The highest placings were 18th and 19th. Another one in top 32. We start seeing a couple Malamars down here somewhere as well. Looks like a handful of the Cephalon as well, making it today too. So yeah, pretty interesting overall. We can get a better picture of this over at the Complexity Card Gaming Pokemon YouTube, not YouTube, what's it called, Facebook page, where we've got ourselves the lovely pie chart. If you want to read into some of the stats and stuff and numbers behind it, you can check out the Facebook page and have a read of the paragraphs. But a quick rundown of the pie chart. Mewtwo and Mew took up the highest percentage of any one deck in day 2, which is pretty awesome. So popular and also being able to push through and actually win, which is great conversion rates. Pikarom also being very popular. Malamar seems to be on the rise for sure. I think there's been like low-key hype around it after we saw Katron make top 8 and also getting top 8 with Matthias Luper as well over in Europe. So a bit more confidence is being restored in Malamar. It seems to be one of those things where remember how hype it was pre-Worlds and then it bombed and everyone said it was awful. And then it's like kind of teetering up through the cups. It's been teetering up in popularity. We've seen a couple people spike their way towards like very decent performances of Malamar, and now confidence is slightly being restored to where some people are saying it's like easily tier 2, maybe even pushing towards tier 1. So yeah, Malamar kind of back on the rise. Pidgeotto Control also doing very well. It's the deck I've been playing for cups and stuff. I've actually bubbled 2 cups with this deck, which is really frustrating for the amount of work you put in with Pidgeotto exactly, and not getting any rewards out of it, but that's my own personal strife, I guess. But yeah, Pidgeotto is still performing, even though Mewtwo is like super hype. I think it's low-key quite a bad thing that like the 3 decks here, Mewtwo, Pikarom, and Mally, although you can beat all 3 of these matchups, it's completely based on the opponent's knowledge of the matchup. I feel like if you play against very skillful Pika, Mally, or Mewtwo players, they're all going to make it very hard for you. So I think as Abilities has gone down in play, Pidgeotto Control's matchups have got a little bit worse. You're only really hoping to find things like Greens decks, Abilities that are still out there, and then like people who just don't know the matchup well enough. So I think that is something to be a little bit concerned about for Pidgeotto Control, but that said, you can still like beat all of the 3 that are above it here in popularity for sure. I think also something to bear in mind that you don't really hear about is just that Pidgeotto mirrors are now like taking losses in regionals, which is actually really ugly. So I don't know about Pidgeotto's placement. The more popular it gets, the more difficult it is for it actually to succeed. Because more people will play tech cards, more people will be aware of it, and facing mirrors is like as bad as taking a loss in regionals, because like someone ties that for sure, like within the 50 minutes. Even if one person's teched with Giraffe and Faber, you're probably still tying, because both of you have so many physical actions to do that you'll just tie anyway. So yeah, that's another like low-key fear I have as a person who's tried to play Pidgeotto a lot this format. You've got to dodge the random Quagnags, the mirrors, and then the good players as well. So that's pretty awkward. Ability Zard is still doing reasonably well. It's not like it's completely died, like some people have predicted. It's still powerful. It's still got Ninetales behind it. It's still got things like Victini Prism, which is like unchecked right now. So I feel like it can still put a shift in. It just doesn't see as much success right now just because the amount of stamp that's prevailing, really, most of the time. Guardian still having a pretty respectable performance. The Blounds list as well. Greenzard still kicking in there after we saw it do well at the special event, the heavy plant stamp build on its own end. A Quagnag snuck in there, or a couple of them, I should say. And then in the other category, there's all sorts of things like that Melmetal deck that I was talking about, a Fossil deck. So yeah, lots of interesting stuff to explore for sure. That's my thoughts on the Knoxville Regional Championships. There's not many tournaments left of this format. There's still, what's it called? There's still Paris coming up, which is the special event that I'm going to. But from there, Richmond and Portland are expanded events. So it looks like that's it for the Americas right now. It's really just down to Paris to really close the book on this format, and then we move on to the new format. So if you haven't already checked out my set review, you definitely can go ahead and do so to get the first look into what Sao Paulo is going to look like. Also, I'm starting to do deck reviews as well. I began last week. I'm going to keep going throughout this week, but I'll also be mixing in some of this standard stuff as well. So thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.